So we're going to talk about influence marketing and how brands can get it right. I think probably best to start with a couple of intros. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. I'm Luke. I work at a company called Whaler, where I sort of help the growth of the business.
My name is Chris Davis. I'm the head of brand partnerships at Glean Futures. We're a talent management company, and we were the first to specialise in what we call digital first talent. So we represent the likes of Zoella, Jim Chapman, Tanya Burr, Naomi Smart, people like that.
Big dogs.
Don't know about that.
My name's Jenny Quigley-Jones, and I run Digital Voices. We're a YouTube specialist influence marketing agency. Basically, we help big brands build campaigns that use influencers. How are you guys? Right. Let's start by talking about what is an influencer.
Do you want to go? Oh, I'll take that one. I think influencer is a really broad term for a huge category of people, but specifically, I think the term influencer in the traditional sense, if you think of somebody like a David Beckham who is influential because of who he is, as opposed to the content he creates, where I think the space that a lot of brands are looking to work in at the moment is really creators who have influence and have an influence over the audience they've created as a consequence of the kind of content that they're making.
Yeah, I concur with that. We were just chatting backstage about this, about how, I guess when you think about influencers, and I think it's such a shady term, isn't it? I'm here to influence people.
It is, yeah.
When actually, people like Alfie, all the guys that are great in the space, they didn't come out and didn't start doing this in order to influence people.
Yeah.
They did it to create content and to kind of engage with an audience in a different way. But yeah, like we were saying, influencers, I guess from a marketing point of view, you could differentiate it in that these are the guys that have built themselves an audience online predominantly, whereas someone like David Beckham has built his influence elsewhere, so on the football pitch, probably.
Yeah, it's kind of like influencer versus celebrity. We tend to say if you only really know them if you follow them on social media, that tends to make them an influencer. Whereas if it's someone the general public would know, that's more of a celebrity.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I'd agree with that, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, since Keith Weed from Unilever said some interesting things at Cannes about professionalising the industry, there's been a lot of discussion about whether the bubble's going to burst. We all think it's not, by the way, because if so, we'd be out of jobs. But do you guys think it's going to burst? And why or why not?
Personally, no. And I think, on one hand, what Keith Weed said was fantastic because it draws a lot more attention to the space and it draws a lot more attention to kind of the problem that is fake followers. But at the same time, if you're doing influencer marketing correctly, then that shouldn't be the first thing on your mind. It shouldn't just be about reach or engagement. It should be about the actual deeper business impact that working with talent can have. And I think, for example, if someone had bought 40% of their audience, it's about how do you get the most out of that 60% of the audience. And I'm sure if you had 200,000 likes on a campaign, are you really going to sell 200,000 bottles of toothpaste, for example?
Yeah,
no. So, I don't know. I think if you're doing it correctly, it doesn't have as much of an impact.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll take a slightly different view, but I do agree with that in terms of a bubble bursting, there's definitely going to be a consolidation in the marketplace. I think the biggest challenge for brands at the moment is, quite frankly, there are so many companies peddling influencer marketing, many different facets of influencer marketing, some very good, some not so good. And I think next year will very much be like, if you look back to sort of, if you're in advertising in 2005, which I was, if you look back at sort of blind ad networks and that kind of space where there was a huge consolidation in that space, I think that's just kind of going to come through in the influencer marketing space. And I think next year in 2019, you'll probably see a lot of companies either merging together or simply going out of business, and a few key reputable partners really working in the marketplace to offer different solutions. And in the end, I think that the key thing that everyone focuses on is people want really good content. And I think in influencer marketing, if you are purely focusing on an audience and you're not focusing on the creative, which is effectively what they're good at and why they have an audience, then I think you're going down the wrong path.
I think to play on that analogy as well of the ad networks is that we saw the way that the digital ad ecosystem moved from into viewability into moving into premium ad placements and not just the unseen ads at the bottom. I think that's kind of a good analogy for working with creators, because there is anybody with a phone these days can be a creator. That's the great thing about the space, and that's also the bad thing about the space, because there is also varying levels of talent out there. So there is working with, Joe Blogs with, 5,000 followers who might be fantastic, but then there's Jess Blogs who's got 5,000 followers but is not so great.
Yeah, I saw the Keith Weed thing as like a desperate call for like professionalising an industry that I think was scaring a lot of brands. I think they felt like they'd seen big scandals like maybe Logan Paul thing and fake followers, and were terrified of finding the right people to partner with. And I think a few years ago, I don't know if you guys felt this, I did, but like when I started in the influencer space, it felt like the Wild Wild West. There was like a real like cowboy, like people walking into meetings like, I'll get you 10 million views. And then the brand would be like, okay, whatever. Whereas it's really shifted now. So where there are much more, I think you have to be much more careful and follow through much more on your kind of predictions and what you offer people. You actually have to like think about guaranteeing in the creative process and the relationship people have with that audience. And I think it's really changing for the better. Have you seen that shift?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the challenge that brand marketers have is there's two components to creator marketing, influencer marketing. One is the creative piece, and one is the audience piece, which kind of falls into a media metric. So I think it can be quite challenging to understand exactly where it sits in terms of whose responsibility. Does it go to a creative agency? Is it going to a media agency? Is it going to an independent? And kind of what do they do with that? And I think hopefully in the next 6 months, even to a year, that will become a lot more clear, especially when it comes to measurement, which measurement has obviously been a big contentious issue in this space. And I think hopefully in time, as we get better measurement tools, as also brands see the potential of all this content that they're creating and using and disseminating to influencer audiences, thinking about how they use that in their paid media strategy as well. If you're creating all this content, there's absolutely no point just wasting it on one audience. How do you then push that beyond the barriers? And how do you find lookalike audiences? Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all very good at finding lookalike audiences. And how do you make that content work harder?
And how do you make it last for longer? I think this comes on to the platform discussion that we wanted to have. Yeah. So I think a lot of people feel as though Instagram and Snapchat, and I mean, if anyone still uses Snapchat, we've been asked to do it for a campaign, but
my wife
works
rare. There, so
does she?
I don't use it, but she does.
Love it. You don't use it?
No.
Or TikTok?
I've never used it, actually. It's just bad.
Oh.
Yeah.
Rocky marriage.
I probably shouldn't say that in front of an audience, should I? Yeah.
This is being recorded. You're in
awesome.
trouble.
Thank you.
Evan Spiegel's watching this now.
So like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram stories, even Facebook, people often see as quite short term. So it's like, how do you use these platforms to get the most out of influence in the long run?
I think like Luke said, I think it's about working with the creator in such a way that it's not like, work with them more than just on their own platforms. Their own platforms are where their audiences are. But then also you can get them, working with talent, you can literally do anything. That's the great thing. They're not just housed on these platforms that they create content on. Like Alfie was saying earlier, he created a gym bar. You can have pop-ups with them. You can get them to drive audiences to live events. You can get them to feature on branded content that lives on brands' channels. Or the way that Luke said, you can put money behind it and disseminate it to new lookalike audiences as well. And if you know what that creator's audience, what makes up that creator's audience and what that kind of key person is, and you can replicate that and extend that reach beyond their following, that's so much more powerful.
Absolutely. I think there needs to be a whole lot more diligence in terms of creating a story. So each social platform has a specific role. So we all know that Twitter's really about live and in the moment. Instagram has that aesthetic. Perhaps YouTube is kind of more face to camera, much more longer form. And how do you create a narrative that can flow from each of those platforms. So take an example that, you might have a sponsorship of a festival. Maybe it's that person starts off on Twitter, it's a live broadcast. Maybe they'll say, hey, catch my Instagram story at a later point when I'm backstage. And then perhaps they do a wrap-up of their first day on YouTube. I think there needs to be a lot more diligence and intelligence around the way that we create a story that kind of fits all that content together as well.
I think that ties into more integrate, like as you're saying, more integrated campaigns, but then also
Buzzword of the day, I love it.
the best way to work with talent is to build relationships with them. They are people at the end of the day, and I think, as we're saying, we're trying to move this away from being a specific, like just a media buyer where you're just buying audiences. It's about building relationships with these people. Long-term relationships are so much more effective if an audience understands that a talent has a real passion for a brand, and because of that passion, they're working closely together. It's so much more effective than just paying someone to just hold up a bottle of toothpaste again. Teeth whitening is a massive thing. But again, teeth whitening. I mean, what else can you get out of teeth whitening? Once you've whitened your teeth once, there's
not much else.
Yeah, there's not much else. But
carry it in your
you've
handbag.
got lovely teeth.
Oh,
lovely teeth. Yeah, thanks. I used this brand last night. It's just about building those relationships, and you get so much more out of it, both the talent and the brand. And it ties back to measurement as well. I'd say one problem that we see from the talent perspective is that those relationships get built between the brand and the talent. The brand are involved all the way along, and it's lovely and great. Then as soon as the campaign's finished, they're gone.
Yeah.
And you don't hear anything else from them again. And the talent on the other side are kind of like, oh right, how did I do? What can I do better next time? It's a full circle relationship, and I think brands are getting much better at this now.
Because even if that relationship doesn't last, you can explain to talent why. And I think a lot of the time we put a load of emphasis on co-creation, because I think everyone on this stage does, which is quite different. There are kind of two schools of thought. The ones that give talent something to put on their, say, Instagram and walk away, and don't let them have a role in the creative brief, and there are agencies that do that. But to us, I think we're all on the creative side, where you'd rather spend time and effort working with the talent to build something that suits their audience and fits with their content naturally, because in the long term that does best. But lots of these talent, they get really excited to be involved in the campaign, and then no one ever shares the details with them. They're fine if they get dropped because they don't drive any actual conversions. I think a lot of them would understand that. But we don't share that information with them enough.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that for brands is, I'm very much an advocate of longer term relationships, but one consideration there from a content perspective is you can get audience fatigue, right? So if you're using someone throughout a year, how do you keep it fresh? And how do you reinvigorate that person to be enthusiastic about the product, but also keeping their audience enthusiastic? And one way that we've seen brands coming to us specifically is they want an annual strategy, but there might be a key set of brand ambassadors that work throughout the year, but they might have special product launches on the side, and we'll look at specific talent or creators who can be utilized to attack those specific briefs. So it doesn't just feel like it's 4 people doing everything throughout the year. How do you strategically use different creators and more importantly with different skill sets to tackle certain briefs?
100%, yeah.
We're seeing, because we specialise in YouTube, we're seeing a lot of brands that now want to build their organic YouTube channel, which I think is quite different. We're used to influencer marketing, where you have them plug it on their socials and then leave. But we're finding we're getting far more requests for, say, talent to make a video on their channel, then push to a series or something they're presenting on the brand's YouTube channel to try and pull that relationship over. And the most fascinating thing we found, we're doing this for the RAF, and we built this channel from scratch, and in 6 months it's got 8,500 subscribers, which is all right for no paid spend. It's all about engineering, and it's a brand channel. No one likes brand channels. People like people. And so we found that the first video that was a partnership with an influencer, people comment, they'd view it, and then they'd comment well, you did well this time. You haven't earned my subscription yet. And I was like, what? Are they kidding? And second video, they'd be like, oh, this was all right. And third video, they're like, I subscribed. So it's really funny. I think you need that longevity. And sometimes for it to feel authentic, 'cause everyone knows it's being paid, you need to create a real sense that in the long term, that talent buys into a brand.
Yeah, I think taking both sides of the spectrum, there's not a one-size-fits-all with any of it. Every talent is unique, every brand is unique, every campaign is unique. So there's different ways to approach it. I think it's just having that foresight to kind of think about that up front, which I think maybe influencer marketing doesn't get enough of at the moment because it's still such a, the Wild West a little bit. But I think when more and more we're starting to see more and more brands actually start to see the benefit of working in this space. So they're actually starting to think to themselves, okay, next year we're going to have the foresight to actually plan this out. And with like the learnings from kind of the companies like ourselves, who have had years of experience in it, we can help guide with that and guide the strategy and activation and creative concepting.
Because I find that when some brands, they'll come up, they'll assign their agency, and then they won't have chosen a specific influence marketing agency. We'll end up subcontracted anyway, because we'll end up subcontracted through their creative agency or their media agency. So like brands, I think, need to think about who they want to work with and the values they want to have with influencers closer to the beginning of the campaign, and really engage with people in the long term, I think. We're influencers too.
I'm certainly not. Yeah. I'm the least influential person you'll ever meet.
Yeah, that's me as well. All right, so do you want to talk about pricing?
Yeah.
Everyone, because we get questions all the time for people who...
How much does it cost?
Yeah, how much does it cost? What platforms cost what? That comes into it quite a lot.
My answer is just the same answer I've been saying all the way through, but it's about, every single talent is different. And if we do resort to just paying someone a set fee because they've got X amount of followers, we fall into the trap of buying fake followers as a brand and then fueling that part of the industry. However, working with a talent, again, you could work with two people with exactly the same style audiences, but actually one person might hire an entire production team to help create that content. Another person might just use their phones. There's varying levels of the way that people produce the content and the way that creators work. So I think you can definitely work with companies to figure out ballparks, but I don't think we could ever really get to a true standardization just because there's so much variety out there.
Exactly, and I think any respectable platform or agency would always give you multiple options of what you can do with a budget and with a focus on you're going to get more content from this, or this is more of an audience play, or it might be, you get so many factors and asks from brands, we want to use this in digital out of home, we want to use this in print. So all of these things effectively affect the price. So it's about being very transparent with brands about what you can get at a price and what would happen if you increase the budget. I think it's just being very transparent about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could I do a weird thing and ask the audience a question? Is that all right?
You can,
guys
if
be
you want,
excited about this. How many people here do work with, say, startups? If you don't mind putting your hand up, who does startups, a very small budget, and who does kind of medium size, and then larger, like bigger budgets. Okay, cool. So I think we have an approach where often startups will come to us and actually it isn't, their budgets are so small that it's not necessarily worth us investing time into it. So I would say it works, influence marketing works for everyone, but if you're a startup, I'd say allocate having maybe someone in-house. I don't know if you guys feel the same about this, but someone in-house to at least trial it and then see if you see the returns, and then you can allocate budget later and go to an agency later.
Absolutely. I think if you're starting small, and actually Whalers Heritage, the company I work for, was founded on the fact that the founder, Neil, created Whaler because he was working for a small brand called Shaw Projects, which sold watches, and he had the predicament that he was a very small brand. He didn't have the money to work with big ad agencies to promote the watches, and Instagram was kind of really growing as a platform. So he went directly to influencers and creators and effectively promoted his product using them in terms of partnerships. Now, the reason Whaler was created is because the scale of his business grew, the space grew, and he needed a piece of technology to effectively house all of these creators and influencers, the ability to pay them as well and pay them quickly and work out all the payment stuff. So I think, you can absolutely start off in the influencer space wherever you are as a company. But, as you allude to, I think it's very important that you work out how you engage with them, because the reason companies like us exist is it is hard work working with creators. It's incredibly time consuming. And I think that some brands don't really appreciate actually the work that goes on behind the scenes, that the companies we work for do. And I think that's very important to appreciate when you're embarking on any form of program or idea working with creators and influencers.
Yeah, I think that to stick on that point, I think that often in the industry we can forget that these are people as well. Yeah. Like, I don't want to end up on a sad story, but there's a creator that we represent. She was due to deliver a piece of content on this specific day at a specific time, and it was all going fine. And then her daughter had to go to hospital, and she was on a shoot, and she found out about this, and she had to leave. Yeah. And we had the brand on the phone to us, like, "What are we going to do? Like, how dare she do this?" We're like, "The poor girl's daughter's in hospital." Yeah. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in that when actually when you're working with people, there's so much more that can go behind. And if you do have situations like that where someone has got to pull out, you've got companies like ours or Whaler who can then kind of find a solution in the short term that can kind of fix those kind of holes. But I didn't want to end on a negative note. It sounds a bit sour, doesn't it? But
I like that. No,
she was all right, by the way. She was okay.
Yeah, we work with we've used this 14-year-old for a campaign before, but so I worked with her when I was at YouTube, and she started vlogging because she had AVM, which is a condition where your veins and arteries merge, and she had to be homeschooled, and she found YouTube was her only way of having friends. And brands, I think when they hear influencer marketing, they think of the Zoella, but they don't think about, say, people who are just trying to connect with audiences. And I think those people often have a lot more power because they bring their whole self to their content, right? It's really tough to do.
And that's what makes this area so effective. It's the relationship that these guys build with their audiences. That is the reason that this is such an effective medium. You know, we refer to it as word of mouth advertising at scale because it is your friend that you've watched for years, and they're on the other side of a screen rather than being directly in front of you. And because of the way that the platforms are built, they can have that direct relationship with their audience, and they can have a conversation with their audience and build that friendship, that credibility, that trust, in a way that maybe Claudia Winkleman, advertising Head and Shoulders at the moment, I'm not sure she uses that, but you know, I'm happy to be proved wrong.
There's an amazing stat that says 4 in 10 millennial subscribers feel like their favourite YouTuber understands them better than their friends, which initially when I say that, people look horrified, like your face is like, no. And they think, oh God, social media's gone too far. The thing I find amazing about that is actually it makes sense to me. Not because I was an avid YouTube watcher growing up, I wasn't, but it's because you look at what people are discussing often when people are tuning into them on YouTube, and they are talking about mental health issues, they're talking about their life, they're talking about how they choose furniture in their house. And that is a deeper and more personal relationship than I think a lot of people have with their friends, where they'll go out for a night out and not discuss that much. So I think it's really important to see and value that connection people have, and also treat these creators as entrepreneurs. And we've been discussing this. They've spent years building content, learning how to edit, learning how to produce stuff. Don't expect them to do things for free.
Yeah, and they've also spent a lot of time working with their audiences. We had an interesting scenario, just kind of pivot from community to authenticity. A lot of the time is, how are you authentic? And we had a creator that was about to work with an FMCG brand, and they'd been talking to their audience about the fact that they're reducing the amount of plastic that they used in the household. Now, this FMCG sent them some product, and it was just totally covered in plastic packaging. So the creator actually went back to us and said, I'm sorry, we can't work on the specific brand. It's not because we don't like them, it's just because our audience would react very badly if we had spent 6 months talking about how we're going to reduce plastic in our household and then suddenly unpackage something with a whole load of plastic. So I think authenticity is incredibly important, and this comes back to Chris's point about them being people as well. They're not a commodity, they're people, they've worked hard with their audiences. I think we definitely need to treat them like that.
Yeah. That's a good way to end. I think we have time for questions, I think. Do you have time for some questions? Does anyone want to ask any questions?
Does everyone feel better about influencer marketing after this? I think everything you read in the press is
so
influencer
negative.
Marketing is the worst. I wish I'd never done it. You shouldn't ever do it. It's going to be dead. So hopefully you'll come off the back of this thinking slightly more positive about it.
Influencers use tortillas as pancakes.
Yeah.
Oh no, the El Derby thing was Dublin, wasn't it? She asked for a free hotel in Dublin, and that.
But I think, to that point, and I guess this is the way to finish of it, is you only ever hear the negatives about it, but actually the positives of the space are fantastic, and some of the results we hear about from campaigns genuinely blow me away.
Yeah,
in
I
terms
can't
of
believe the cost as well. If you scale it right and work with the right people, you can get really effective return on investment, which is better than paid because people actually watch it. People don't want to watch ads. They want to watch something they've chosen to engage with, and that's where influencers come in much more. Oh, there is a question. I like the solitary hand, sign of hope. Go on.
How important do you think it is to monitor how many brands each talent would work with?
Yeah, very
I mean, we'll both take it. I mean, I think it's very important. I think specifically, I mean, how we work at Whaler in terms of a contract with a creator, like they can't work with competitive brands. They can't post about 5 brands in a row. I think if you're working with a partner that is advocating that it's okay that a creator posts for 5 different brands 5 days in a row, then there's a serious issue there. There's also a serious issue with the creator and their authenticity, and I probably decline to work with them, but no, that absolutely shouldn't be the case. You have a lot of brands that do ask for exclusivity for a certain period of time, and I think we both all agree on that, wouldn't we, I think?
Yeah.
I've actually had creators push back as well. So when brands have come to them and said, right, this needs to go out now, the creator will be like, no, I can't do 2 sponsored videos in a row. And it's like, sorry if they should have planned better. Sorry if this interrupts with the timing of your campaign, but I will lose the trust of my audience. And I think when a creator says that, although it is really inconvenient for a brand, I'd be slightly reassured because you know they're not just clearly making their audience feel like a cash cow.
There's a very fine balance because the audience go there for the content they create organically, and that's why they got there in the first place. If that's then replaced by ads continuously, then that's, there's no point working with them anymore.
Thank you. Cool, thanks. Well, also the best thing that I've found, we did this partnership with an Irish fellow from Galway, actually. And we were a bit nervous because it was partnering with the RAF. And he made this amazing video about like how NASA makes tyres. I didn't realise it was such a thing. Got 2.2 million views. And the thing that amazed me was the #1 comment was, "Oh my God, I can't believe you got sponsored by such a prestigious organisation." And that comment had been upvoted like 4,000 times. And to me, I think if you can do the co-creation approach that we all really recommend, where your brand fits with their organic content, right? So it doesn't feel like an advert chucked in there. That makes all the difference for the audience because they'll actually appreciate that your brand has given someone creative freedom. It's let them make something that suits their audience and actually appeals to them. So I think that is one of the most important aspects.
Cool. Agreed.
I agree with that.
Any other questions? My mic broke midway through. I don't know if you noticed me holding it up. Great. Well,
right.
I think we'll be around afterwards. I'll go over there if anyone wants to chat.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah. Nice to
Great,
meet you all.
Thank you very much.